Alrighty, thank you so much. I will get to sharing the screen now. Let's see. Everybody see that? I think so. Cool. Hello, everyone. Thank you guys for having me. My name is Chase Egli, as Mason had said, and I'm going to take you guys on kind of a tour of Alabama, the Cretaceous period here, and talk about some of the sharks that we have commonly here. But first, see if I can get it. There we go. We'll kind of get a little bit about myself. As Mason said, I am an undergraduate researcher at the University of Alabama. I am under Dr. Takahito Ikejiri. He is a paleontologist in the department here, and he studies mainly mosasaurs as well as some Devonian plants. So he's very diverse in his interests. But for me, I study mainly the taxonomy, which is the classification, and the phylogeny, which is the evolution through time of fossil sharks, in particularly the Cretaceous period, as well as the Paleogene. So kind of the Paleocene through the Eocene, that's the Paleogene. And I am a junior here at the University of Alabama. I was originally a music major my freshman year, but I decided that I'd really, really like rocks. So I had to switch. And just a couple pictures. All of these are from Alabama, funny enough, except for the two on the left. So 50% are from Alabama. The other 50% are from Mississippi. But political boundaries, you know, same rocks. So we'll jump into it. In general, Alabama has one of the most complete sequences of fossiliferous strata in the world. You can find fossils all over the state. You get kind of the tail endings of the Appalachian Mountains, kind of here, in the northeast portion. There's actually a lake up there where you can find Cambrian trilobites, which is really interesting. But throughout the state, you can find shark teeth. In the Paleozoic, you can. I've been up towards Huntsville. You can see kind of up in the top there, looking for sharks such as you've got Cyvodus, and lots of different already extinct orders of sharks, some really crazy looking teeth. But you can see as you kind of start getting down towards Tuscaloosa there in the center left, you start getting sequences that kind of go towards our coastline. And that is getting into the Mesozoic era. And these sequences that you see are the shorelines of Alabama back in time. And as the water progressed outwards through geologic time, you got deposits of that ocean strata going towards our modern coastline. And in general, we'll take a zoom into the Cretaceous here. We have lots of different Cretaceous formations here in Alabama. We start off typically up north with the Utah Formation, and that is the oldest formation here in Alabama. It is late Centonian to early Campanian in age. And then we go towards the Morville Chalk, Demopolis Chalk, the Ripley Formation, and the Prairie Bluff Chalk. All of them, except for the Utah, are chalk formations, which we'll get into. Interestingly enough, this is kind of a quick aside, the political map of Alabama also looks very, very similar. When you look at it, it's a lot of red counties, but then when you get into the counties, it almost exactly follows the geological map. You get Democratic counties, and this, unfortunately, is because the chalk formations here served really well for lime, and it's very, very good for agriculture. You get a lot of growth of plants on this chalk, especially the Morville chalk. It's difficult to keep Morville chalk from getting grown over. And unfortunately, in the past, that was very good for agriculture, and so slavery was very prominent in this area. And so you get a higher density of the African-American population in Alabama is in this kind of belt here. They call it the Black Belt, because of all the industry that we had in the area. And they vote more Democrat. And so you get that kind of line. It's very interesting piece of history instead of prehistory, I guess. So this is kind of how our Alabama geology works. Tuscaloosa County sits just above that county to the very top left. That's Pickens County. There at the top left. And the name of the game here in Alabama is chalk. We have chalk everywhere. It's a very big production source of lime for a lot of the agriculture around here, as I had mentioned. And a lot of people grew up around that chalk. It's everywhere. You'll hear lots of people talking about the white cliffs that you see throughout the central Alabama. And you can see above, you've got Harrell Station. That's a piece of University of Alabama property. It's probably about as much chalk as you'll ever see in one place at one time. It's a very, very cool place to go. Lots of very interesting fossils, which you'll see soon. And that there is a picture of me and the curator of the Alabama Museum of Natural History, the Paleontology Collections, Dr. Adiel Klumpmaker. And then down on the left, that's an exposure of Demopolis Chalk. Unfortunately, that whole day, you can see there's a couple people there. We found half a fish vertebra and a fish tooth. So sometimes the density of the fossils and the formations can be a little sparse, unfortunately. But we'll jump right into it. So our latest formation, our oldest, is the Utah Formation, as I had said. It has a very, very diverse assemblage of sharks, probably the most diverse out of all the formations here in Alabama. We get lots and lots of smaller sharks like cat sharks, hound sharks. You get some, I believe it's sawfish, saw sharks. And you get some very large sharks. Some of the largest sharks to ever swim in the Cretaceous existed in the Utah Formation of Alabama. A couple of those would be Toxiorinomantelli, which is the famous one, the famous Jinzu shark, as well as crushing sharks, Tychotus. Get Cretaceous, one of the famous mackerel sharks that you can see even in Maryland. When you get into the Paleocene, you can see some Cretaceous, but we've got their great granddad of the same genus. And so when you start looking for fossils here in Alabama, if you're in the Utah Formation, this is going to be a shark that you'll find at least once. I can promise. I would put money on it. Panoramicus texinis is extinct genus of goblin shark here in Alabama. It was the largest species of goblin shark by far, with teeth that exceed 2 inches in length. I've personally found one on the former slide in the top left there that was 2 1/4, almost 2.5 inches long. So when you're talking about the typical thing that shark researchers use is probably 10 feet an inch. So that's like a 25-foot goblin shark, which is kind of scary to think about, honestly, because we know the rostrum of goblin sharks is a trait that existed even back in basal, very primitive goblin sharks had that rostrum. So kind of scary to think about 25-foot goblin sharks swimming around the Cretaceous, especially considering how common they were. This is probably the most common shark in the Utah Formation. I've been out in a creek where, you can't step without stepping on a Squalocorax. Got to the point where I was filling old Coke bottles full of Squalocorax teeth that I didn't deem quality enough to put in display cases. And sometimes you can see, and I've only really seen it in Mississippi and Alabama, some Squalocorax can get pseudo-serrations, is the way I'd like to explain it, on the cusps. They get these weird foldings on the cusp, and that's only something I've ever seen in Alabama, though that could always just be an artifact of me seeing a lot of teeth in Alabama. So Squalocorax texinis is a very, very cool animal. As you can see, we have upper interior and an upper lateral, very much adept for spearing fish. And they were very, very prominent in doing so, which is interesting because in the Utah Formation, this is a personal experience. I haven't really found that much fish material in the Utah. So maybe it was just all in the stomachs of Squalocorax, I guess. So it's a good theory for it, I guess. The next shark we have is Tychotus. Tychotus is a genus of, it's debated on what they are. It was traditionally thought that they were hybodont sharks, which is an extinct order of shark that dies out in the Cretaceous. But recent analysis of the enamel layering of the shark teeth really point to it being a lamniform, which is very interesting to think about. It would be probably it'd obviously be the most highly derived lamniform, but more study is needed in order to, I guess, fully put an ID taxonomically on it. But Tychotus was a shell-crushing shark. They ate lots of, you could eat ammonites, and they could eat some of the oysters that we have here. And you're thinking, man, if that shark can get teeth that exceed 3 inches, they're eating oysters? Well, you got to understand, this is an oyster, just as one oyster. I've seen them get probably 2 times this size. It's an oyster of an exogyra. Just one oyster, and there are fields full of these oysters that you can find here in Alabama. They were not uncommon. These are probably the most common oyster in Alabama. And so you can kind of see how there would be a diet to fuel such a large shell-eating shark. And these sharks are debated to be some of the largest sharks in the Cretaceous. It's debated whether, that title is taken by Cretoxyorina or taken by Tychotus. You get an individual tooth from Tychotus anonymous. We have one in the museum here that's pushing 3 inches in width, and it's the center tooth of that animal. As you can see in the top left, we have a lower jaw, and the anterior teeth were in the middle there, like the one on the top of the bottom picture. And then the posterior tooth, kind of near the edge of the plate, were a lot smaller. They got smaller in size. And so that's one of the more common sharks in the area. They're still very cool to find, just so unique looking. I mean, my advisor has seen people find big ones on some of the tours that we run over the summer, go, that's a rock, an interesting rock, and then throw it back in the creek. I personally would cry, but I didn't see any of that this summer, thank goodness. So Tychotus is a very interesting shark for sure. And then we can't mention the Cretaceous of Alabama with not mentioning Toxiorinomantelli. This shark is known as the Jinzu shark because of its presumed feeding mechanics. It was supposed to slice through lots of bony fish and even a pteranodon. They found a Cretoxiorina tooth embedded in a pteranodon's neck. Lots of these sharks were, through in the Western Interior Seaway, but around here, they were a lot less common. And they got, upwards of 6 meters in length. The teeth, range, you get them up to probably 3 inches. I think the unofficial record that I've heard about is 3¼ inches, which if you use that prior metric 10 feet an inch, that's a 33-foot shark. It's not small for certain. But these teeth are very hard to find in Alabama. Luck, it's pretty difficult to find. I found a couple myself on tours if you put yourself in the right spot, because a lot of the environments here in Alabama were more near shore environments, and this shark was more of a pelagic animal. So you would get, if you get one here, it's pretty uncommon. It's a spectacle. You gotta jump for joy in the creek when you find one of these. Very interesting shark. And then we get to the crow shark, Squalocorax. We get, it's very, very debated, and some of what I put in this slide, it could be considered controversial to some shark paleontologists. That's okay. There are typically 2 species of Squalocorax present in the Utah Formation. There's Squalocorax gangaensis, and then the very ending of the Squalocorax hartwelli species. And Squalocorax gangaensis is probably the most interesting shark, in my opinion, here, because they're the only shark really at all that I've seen that gets this interesting concavity on the cutting edge of their teeth. And why, it's unsure. It actually pops up a couple more times in the Squalocorax genus. It's very interesting. And Squalocorax gangaensis is one of the first lamniform sharks to get complex serrations. So you get serrations like, like a knife, or they're just little bumps, but then sometimes you get the serrations that have multiple smaller ones in it. Some of the tiger shark, the extinct tiger shark species have them. And then you get what's much more uncommon, but they get more common the younger you get, is the main Squalocorax lineage, starting with Squalocorax hartwelli, often called Squalocorax falcatus, but that is considered a paleobucket taxa with lots of different species being lumped together into this one name of shark. It makes researchers' head spin for sure, but you get a very distinct cutting edge in that lateral, that notch on the distal side of their tooth. And a lot of people think these are very similar to tiger shark teeth, which they very well could have been. But they're a very interesting shark for sure, and they will pop up a lot in this presentation. So onward we go into the younger formations. We get into the Morval Chalk, like the picture from the chalk slide. The Morval Chalk is early Campanian to earliest middle Campanian in age. Sometimes it overlaps a little with the Tombigbee Sands, which is a unit of the Utah Formation. And that's because, interestingly, the further east you get, the older the strata gets, because of the water getting deeper in depth. The further west you get into the Mississippi embayment, because we used to have an embayment, the younger it gets in the formation. And there's not much change in the Morval Chalk at all, though you're starting to get animals disappearing, because we have what some of the researchers here call the Middle Campanian crisis, where some animals go regionally extinct and some go extinct in general, like Cretoxiorina is phasing out in this age, as well as Tychotus, and Squalocorax yangaensis is on its last legs, at least regionally here. But we start to get more sharks coming into the picture. One of them being Cretaceous bryanti. Cretaceous bryanti is named, if you've ever kind of looked into football, I'm sure you've heard of Paul Bear Bryant. He's a very famous head coach from the University of Alabama here. And his family owns a lot of property that you can find shark teeth on. And so when we figured out that this species of Cretaceous was one that had yet to be described, it was named by June Ebersol and Dana Ehret after the Bryant family for all that they've done for this university. And it's a very interesting animal. The anterior teeth look very similar, as you can see, to your typical Cretaceous. But as you get further back in the jaw, the teeth become a lot more elongated, and you get multiple cusps on the tooth, which is very interesting for Cretaceous. It's not common at all. And these two pictures here are some of the holotypes. They aren't, I believe the anterior might be pictured in the paper, but they're holotypes, which are the original specimens that the species was described off of. And we have them here in the University of Alabama at our collections. It's a very cool shark for sure. You can find them somewhat in the Utah Formation, but mainly here in the Morval Chalk. Very interesting animal. And then as we keep going, we kind of take a little jump, transition into the Demopolis Chalk, which is late middle Campanian to the latest Campanian. So we're getting towards the asteroid, but not too close. But now we have some familiar faces that are completely extinct, such as Cretoxiorina and Tychotus, but we start to get a couple new faces that are coming into the picture, and some that are becoming more prominent. We start with Archaeolomna copengensis. It is a brief visitor here. We seldom find them anywhere else except the Demopolis Chalk. And that's because Archaeolomna copengensis was more of a temperate water shark. You typically find them in mass in New Jersey, You could find them obviously on the European side of things in Sweden. That's where the holotypes were described, and the UK and France and Netherlands. But we get them occasionally here. In some places, they're even more common than Cretaceous, which is very interesting. And they're only found regularly in the Demopolis Chalk. I've only personally seen one found in a younger formation here in Alabama and Mississippi, and a few found in older formations. And it's one of the mackerel sharks. And you'll notice that as we go further into the presentation, mackerel sharks are getting more common, which is a trend that's very interesting. And then we touch back onto the Squalocorax genus. We have Squalocorax protodonus, which has been present since the early Campanian, but they are more common in this formation. They're probably the most common shark in the Demopolis Chalk. I've personally went out on outcrops in Mississippi and found 30 to 40 shark teeth, which is very uncommon. A lot of people I know in Maryland, you go out and you can find tons of teeth on the beaches, but here 10 shark teeth on a football field sized outcrop is a good day. Scary as that sounds. But some of these sharks are lumped into Squalocorax cowpi, which is supposed to exist with Squalocorax protodonus. But what I've been working on, it's some of my research. I'll touch on what I mainly work on, but I've been working on Squalocorax research a lot. And you can kind of see that the distal notch on the, well, I guess it's on the right side of both of these teeth, they're just facing different directions, is starting to disappear. But it doesn't disappear as quickly in smaller Squalocorax, which leads to people typically splitting between two different species, Squalocorax protodonus and Squalocorax cowpi. But you never really see juveniles of protodonus and adults of cowpi, which is very interesting and warrants further research. But as we go on in time, and as if you've looked at the Squalocorax pictures, the notch on the side of the tooth is slowly but surely disappearing. It's a very interesting trait, very interesting trend. And then we get into the Ripley Formation. The Ripley Formation has a more famous subunit of it, which is the Coon Creek Formation. It's famous for its original shell preservation, as well as the dinosaur bones that have actually been found in the Tennessee area of this formation. But the Ripley Formation is very well known for its preservation of bones. I believe Deinosuchus was described from the Ripley, and I've personally seen skulls of whole marine crocodiles perfectly preserved from the Ripley Formation. But there's not much faunal turnover from the Demopolis Chalk into the Ripley, but you start getting new animals. You start getting one of the notable occurrences in the latest Cretaceous, you start getting Ceratolamna maricana. Now, Ceratolamna maricana is a mackerel shark that kind of appears out of nowhere. It's found in the early Campanian or early Maastrichtian, and this is one of the more early instances of that. And for a long time, it was considered that these teeth were from a Cretaceous, but the lack of lingual protuberance, which is the bump in the middle of the root on the labial side, as well as the common multiple cusps that you see, the multiple outward facing cusps, really indicate that it's actually from the Ceratolamna genus. And these start popping up and they don't really get more common, but they exist here. It's very interesting. And then we get into the final formation that we have in the Cretaceous, and that's the prairie bluff chalk. And the prairie bluff chalk is very interesting because you start seeing, well, the culmination of things, you get this very broad cutting dentition that's very common now. Like when you look at the Utah Formation, you get a lot of smaller sharks, and you get big sharks with very, very, I guess, elongated teeth with cusps. You get a lot more slender Cretaceous, and you get Panoramicus as well. But now that we're, a few million years into the future, you get more broad cutting designs in the sharks there, and you start seeing more species of mackerel shark appear, like Ceratolamna serrata and that Ceratolamna maracana, as you can see on the right. And on average, the shark fauna is around the same size, and they're honestly a little larger than they have been in the past. The disparity between like the sizes of the sharks are a lot less. You get a lot more even sizes, and they're all consistently growing larger until they get to the KPG. As you can see, we have Squalocorax protodonus in the middle there. It has no distal notch, so it has officially disappeared in adult specimens at this time, and is working on disappearing in juvenile specimens. And then you'd be surprised, we can find Cretaceous shark teeth not in the Cretaceous. How is that? So during the KPG event, we weren't too far away. We were kind of right in the direct line of fire from the Yucatan Peninsula where the meteorite hit or the asteroid hit. And this caused a mega tsunami. It's been debated, but I think it's kind of been settled that it was a mega tsunami that caused the upturn. It ripped up the top of the prairie bluff chalk and just, washed it out up onto shore. And this caused a lot of upturn of different rocks and a lot of fossils that were present in the prairie bluff chalk. And so this specimen here, it's a piece of this tsunami deposit with a Squalocorax, which is soundly extinct by the Paleocene. It does not make it past the KPG in a rock that was found below the KPG event. And so it's a very interesting find. It's very cool to think about how that occurred and how there's a time jump between the prairie bluff chalk and the overlying Paleocene because of this. And now I can kind of take a talk about my undergraduate research. I've been looking in particular at the Pseudocorax genus. It's the false crow shark, very similar to Squalocorax. It's actually the second shark to garner serrations in the Cretaceous. And it's a small to medium-sized lamniform shark. Now, it's been debated on whether it and Squalocorax are lamniform sharks. There are some people that suggested that it was possibly a hexanchid, like a cow shark type animal, but histology, which is the analysis of the enamel and the dentine in the tooth, really point to it being either a carchariniform or a lamniform, and it's more than likely a lamniform shark from what we get in the morphology. And there are multiple species that have been found in North America. You get Pseudocorax granti, which we find here in Alabama. We actually find all three species. Pseudocorax laevis, which is much larger, and then Pseudocorax affinis, which garners serrations. And the reason I am looking at these is because there's a lot of debate on whether certain species are lumped or certain species are split. Now, a lot of researchers in the general area haven't found Pseudocorax affinis. It's actually a new instance that we're going to report. And then we are also taking a look at the different taxonomy and the morphologies of Pseudocorax granti and Pseudocorax laevis to see whether the recent literature, as it suggests, lumping those two as Pseudocorax laevis or keeping them split as two separate species of shark. And there are possible theories. I haven't reached a conclusion yet. I'm still working on the data for it. There's possible theories for both. Pseudocorax granti is often found in Texas and somewhat in the Western Interior Seaway and somewhat into the Mississippi embayment. It's possible that these are just juvenile granti or juvenile laevis that just existed in this localized area and then traversed out as they grew. But what I think is more likely is that these are two animals that are both in different tropic levels, one in a larger, more pelagic, that's the word for it, more pelagic animal and one more localized here in the Americas. They do occasionally find granti-like teeth in Europe, but not very often. And they mostly find Pseudocorax laevis, which kind of more points to the latter theory of splitting them. And a lot of this work, it was very passionate. I was lucky enough to receive a lot of research materials and unpublished work from the late shark paleontologist Gerard Case. And this was a very passionate thing that he had been working on before he unfortunately passed away. He was very adamant since he was, him and Henry Capetta, two very famous shark paleontologists, erected Pseudocorax granti. He was very adamant that they were two separate species. And so he was working on a defense of splitting them as opposed to lumping them like a lot of American shark paleontologists that study the Cretaceous have done recently. And then on top of the defining the type sections and making sure we understand the holotypes of Pseudocorax and the splitting and lumping, we also have a couple new instances of Pseudocorax that we need to describe. The first is in the previous slide, the Pseudocorax affinis. We have a couple that have been found in Mississippi that have defined serrations, and they'd be the first instance of Pseudocorax affinis in the Mississippi embayment. And they'd also be the furthest south latitudinally that they have been found, which is very important for the paleobiogeography of that genus. And then we also have a couple new instances that were found in the Campanian that have not been described. An interesting story on one, Pseudocorax laevis from the Frankstown Sands. The Frankstown Sands, there's a famous park in Mississippi. It's the W.M. Browning National Fossil Park, known as Frankstown. And it's very famous. People find lots of shark teeth there. It's hunted a lot. One of my good friends actually settled on a house, and his realtor had been to Frankstown. And she wanted us, because she knew I was going to be there, to take a look at some of the shark teeth that she had found. And so picture us here at Longhorn Steakhouse celebrating my friend buying a new house. And we're looking through a little cup of shark teeth. And I'm just kind of looking through. And then all of a sudden I see it. There's a Pseudocorax. And they have not been described. None have been found. There are none in any museum in the area. It just here in a Longhorn Steakhouse. And so I nearly fainted. It was a good time. And I took a picture and asked if she could donate it. And it now resides in the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science. So that's a very cool discovery, and one that I'm glad we found, and I'm glad we went to that Longhorn Steakhouse. And we have some other instances from Russia of Pseudocorax affinis from the early and late Maastrichtian, which is interesting. Definitely the right place for them. It'd just be interesting to look at them compared to the holotypes. The holotypes are from the Netherlands. And then we also, I had found in the Demopolis Chalk of Mississippi, a Pseudocorax with serrations, partial serrations, which is very interesting because this outcrop, pending reconfirmation of the microfossils, is probably going to be the first Pseudocorax, or the oldest Pseudocorax, to have serrations. And this kind of throws a wrench into things, because the Pseudocorax that we find with serrations, the start of that, and everywhere else where it's been described, is the very, very latest Campanian into the earliest Maastrichtian. And so that there's a difference of a couple million years between that and this too. So that kind of throws a wrench into the phylogeny of the animal. And so my goal is to find another one so that we can make sure that it's not just a weird pathology or a deformity of the tooth. And hopefully we can find another. We found more that are not serrated, so that's always good. But hopefully we can find one more just to confirm that it's a trend and not just an abnormality. And so those are a couple of things that we're working on getting described and published on. And then just kind of for fun at the very end, I've got a couple other fossils that Some of them are Cretaceous, some of them aren't Cretaceous, that I've found in the state of Alabama. On the very left, you have a very, very early Carcharocles angustidens, found in the very early Oligocene. Now there are discrepancies. Some people would call it Carcharocles arcuatus, but Carcharocles arcuatus is a early Eocene, kind of into the middle Eocene chronospecies, not early Oligocene. Some people, and I can understand, call it Atotus sokolovi or Carcharocles sokolovi. I've kind of switched my thinking on the genus name for them. And both goes. It's just put in names on a chronospecies, same animal. But that was a tooth that we found in the early Oligocene. I got lucky. I had knee surgery this spring, and I was fresh off of being able to walk. So I got to join my friend George Phillips. Well, he wasn't able to come, so I went with the Mississippi state geologist. His name is James Starnes, to an early Oligocene pit and found lots of teeth, and got lucky to find that, which was immediately donated to the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science. And then to the left on the bottom, we have a nautiloid. It's Hercoglossia ritchie. It's a nautiloid that we find in the Dannian here, a very early Dannian, Paleocene. And that's a nicer specimen that we found. That was a cool one. We found lots. They get up to, they get over a foot in diameter. It's crazy when you hit a bump on your car going up a road in, I guess it's like a forest, logging industry, and it's a nautiloid that you just ran over. And then above that it's a large tooth. It's from a Mosasaurus maximus. I found that in the prairie bluff of Mississippi, and I nearly passed out. I was pretty happy. I was in shock. One of the pictures from my About Me page, or About Me slide, is me going like this with maybe like 1/12 of the tooth. I have it here. I mean, maybe like this much of it was sticking out. And I was like, oh, a little mosasaur tooth. And then it just kept going and going and going. So that's an interesting tooth. I've promised that if it goes anywhere, it goes to the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science. But for now, it's with me, where I get to enjoy it. And then below that is a molt. It's a fossil molt of a swimming crab. It was found in the early Oligocene, Necronectes. It's the genus is the same as the modern shark, or modern, stuck on sharks, modern blue crab. And then beside that is a mosasaur vertebra found in the Tombigbee sands. And above that is a partial skull of a baby mosasaur that was donated to the Alabama Museum of Natural History. So that's all I've got for you guys. Well, that's exciting, a mosasaur talk. Well, I've got Alabama and mosasaurs. We have a lot of mosasaurs. I mean, we found whole skeletons of Mosasaurus maximus, and that small mosasaur skull actually might be used for isotope analysis, because there was a recent paper that did it on an adult, but they didn't have a baby. And I know researchers wanted to work on that. I'm not sure if she's reached out to the proper authorities to talk about doing that, but it's pretty cool. But that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
No, thank you, Chase. This was fabulous. Can you unshare your screen and we can come back together?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And let me put the spotlight on that. Who else do I need to? Mason, you can go ahead with the questions. I'll just.
All right. So yeah, guys, ask if you have any questions here. Make sure to put them in chat so we can ask Chase about them. So first question that we had somewhere on there was goblin sharks you mentioned, which I encourage people to look up because they're really gnarly looking sharks. What you mentioned their rostrum, the big nose. What's that for?
I believe it was at least for the modern extant species. I believe it's for like finding their prey in deep water. I'm not 100% certain on that. That might be me messing that up, but I'm pretty sure that's what it's for. And I'm sure that Panoramicus texinis, the extinct goblin shark that I was talking about, I'm sure that that wasn't really used. The rostrum wasn't used, but it's easier to, not, you don't really want to get rid of it per se. I'm sure they weren't evolved enough to have gotten rid of that. But as far as I'm aware, it's a sensory organ because it's typically a deep water shark, but not in this case at least.
All right, we have a question here from Kelly Lindo's child here. Would you like to talk to us? You can unmute yourself.
My dad found this tooth in North Carolina, and we wonder what tooth it is.
Let's see if I can find it. I think I got a brief look of it, and it looked like a megalodon tooth. It looked like Carcaracles megalodon, which is really cool, actually. They're one of the, I think they're the biggest shark to ever exist. That's exciting. It's a cool find.
Thanks.
No problem.
Awesome tooth. Yeah, definitely a really cool find. The largest shark that could ever live. It was like 60 feet, I think, is the largest estimates currently. Any other questions here? We have a question. Jonathan Parks Allen is raising his hand, so you can unmute and ask.
This is just a matter of personal interest because I'm originally from Mississippi, and I was curious if you're originally from Alabama or Mississippi. Or if you're just from the area.
Well, I'm actually I'm from Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
So like
close.
kind of close. I have family that lives in northwest Alabama. But what really brought me to Alabama was, well, I've been an Alabama football fan my whole life. And the music program had a lot to offer. Thankfully, the geology program did as well, because that's where I ended up, staying. But I've just gotten to know Alabama through my time being here as a college student, and I really like it here. It's great.
That's good to hear. Also, if you ever need help getting access to any chalk outcrops in Noxubee County, Mississippi, contact me because that's where a lot of my people are.
I have to do that. Yeah, definitely. I've been in Noxubee County. I do a lot of hunting in I think it's Lowndes County near Columbus, as well as Oktibbeha County.
Oh yeah.
And then up, I don't know what county up near Tupelo is, but I hunt up there a lot.
First place I lived was Sugarlock, Mississippi. On
Okay. I think I've heard of it.
I'm not sure which. I think the Demopolis Chalk might be the outcrop right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Demopolis Chalk is cool. There's actually a cliff near probably an hour from here. It's a whole cliff right beside a river of just Demopolis Chalk. If you look up, it's I'll type it in chat. It's the White Cliffs of Epps. It's very cool. I'll type it in chat.
Yeah, and also if you want to type in chat how people can contact you if they come up with a question afterwards.
Absolutely, yeah. I can leave my email into the in the chat. I'll do that right now.
Yeah. And then the next question is from Elizabeth. She asks, do we know why crow sharks had their unique shape, and what were their feeding habits? I know you have a lot of thoughts on this subject.
I do have a lot of thoughts on this subject. A lot of people have assumed that Squalocorax has their distinctive shape simply because they were scavengers. Obviously, there would have been a lot of biomass, so a lot of dead animals that floated around in the Cretaceous. Because what we see today, you'd think you don't really see whales floating around that much. That's because we've, as humans, really messed up the whale population, to say it lightly. But I've tended to believe that Squalocorax has their distinctive shape because they were very, very good generalists, which means they could eat anything. But they did. I mean, every shark that you'll see is an opportunistic feeder. They will eat dead, carcasses in the ocean. You see great white sharks doing it. That doesn't make them a primary scavenger like people have suggested with Squalocorax. So I am under the belief, and I've looked very heavily at Squalocorax as it evolves through time, that originally in the earlier Cretaceous, they started off as more like sort of like Squalocorax, but a lot smaller. They're a very small fish-eating shark. They had no serrations, and some of the earliest instances that we see actually have cusps. And so as you look through time, you see them lose the cusps and get serrations, and their teeth go, so there's heterodonty in their jaw. So the teeth on the lower jaw and going back were a lot different than the upper jaw going back. And they become homodont, which means that all the teeth look the same. And I've believed this to be the case because they are becoming generalized in their diet so that they can hunt anything. I know some people have suggested that Squalocorax did this and had this distinctive shape so they could eat cephalopods like ammonites and stuff like that. But I personally believe, and I think the evidence really shows that they did it in order to be able to eat a more broad diet, which is also more than likely why they get so abundant throughout the Cretaceous and become very successful in the late Cretaceous.
Awesome.
So yeah, that's the kind of the heart shape of Squalocorax, is kind of just so it can eat a bit of anything, and that's why they get serrations.
So Terrence Skelton asks, what's the name of the, if you know it, what is the name of the museum in Alabama that they have the fossils hanging from the ceiling? And if so, what is that fossil?
Yeah, the museum here in Alabama, it's the Alabama Museum of Natural History. It's located on campus here at Tuscaloosa. And the fossil hanging from the ceiling is Basilosaurus setoides, which is an old, a primitive whale that has been found in Alabama. And yeah, it's still hanging from the ceiling. That mold of Basilosaurus is actually common. Oh, not really common. It's also present in the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science and one other museum. I think it might be the Mace Brown Museum, but I'm not sure. So don't quote me on that.
And Lance Miller's raising his hand. So if you want to unmute yourself, Lance, and ask.
Hi, Chase. Great talk.
Thank you.
I don't think I've ever seen an explanation for the biological reasoning or function behind cusps. You see different species evolving into and evolving out of cusps on the teeth. Could you speak to that?
I can. I would say the most reasonable reason, the most accepted reason is in order to help grasp more slippery prey. You see some sharks nowadays, like Carcharias taurus, just the sand tiger shark, and I think salmon sharks have cusps still. You see a lot of them eating smaller fish, and a lot of those with that more broad design could just slip straight through the teeth. And so these cusps kind of help grasp as opposed to cut animals. And so it's basically a function of their diet. So that's kind of that's my reasoning behind why cusps exist.
Great, appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Terrence Skelton also asks, you say you use the term mackerel shark. Why are they called mackerel sharks?
Well, they're called mackerel sharks because I guess the kind of tooth design, they're not necessarily, the Cretaceous teeth are not necessarily mackerel sharks. We don't know really what they ate per se, but they have the same tooth design as modern day mackerel sharks, which are like the polar beagle shark or the salmon shark, which typically eat larger fish. And so that's why we call them mackerel sharks.
Any more questions before we wrap up? Here we have one. How do you think a Ginsu shark, so Cretoxyrhino, was able to catch a pteranodon, which is of course a flying reptile? It must be hard for a shark to catch a flying animal, right?
Yeah, you definitely would think so, and I agree. I mean, I think it must have just been a very well-timed thing. Maybe the pteranodon was going for a fish or something and was flying very close to the water. And I would assume that Ginsu sharks were more or less, probably pretty quick. And so I'm sure it was able to just kind of get a hold of the animal. I don't remember the exact specifics, whether the animal died or kept going. I'm sure it probably died, I would assume. But yeah, that's that would be my explanation for it, is the animal probably got just too close to the water. A very volatile ocean in the Cretaceous. Lots of things that will eat you.
All right, I think that's it. But of course, Chase put his email in the thing. So if you ever want to ask him a question, I'm sure he'd love to answer. And everyone's saying thank you. And of course, the NHSM and me personally, thank you for giving us this wonderful talk and your time. It was really cool.
Hey, well, thank you so much for having me, guys.
Thank you so much, Chase. And I forgot on my, and I put it in the chat box for next month, because I was talking about 2022, and it's the first Wednesday in January. Is Lance on here? Do you want to tell us who our speaker is going to be? You are the person who organized their speaker.
I'm incredibly unprepared to do that. We have we have a researcher from Australia who has been researching a large winged dinosaur while we're talking about pteranodons, and he's going to give a talk about that find. Sorry, my memory is too inept to start spitting out species.
Yeah, it's in the chat box, everyone. It is the Sapunagagashawi pterosaur. Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce that. But anyway, it is coming up the first Wednesday in 2022. We're having a presenter all the way from Australia coming to your Zoom box. So make sure that you RSVP. The link is in there or on our website, and then you'll be given emailed the Zoom link for that presentation. So everybody stay well, stay curious, and we'll see you in 2022. We'll see you next year.
Thank you, Chase. Good luck with your research.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And thank you for our interpreters. It was fascinating.
Yes, y'all did a great job.
Yes, thank you, Jamie and Jamie. I think I've said that to you like 80 times, but.
And I don't know how you were able to sign all of the scientific names of the Cusps, but it was fabulous. And everyone, be safe and have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you next year.
Okay, roll tide.